This is the first section on labour markets, and I really like these diagrams because they remind me a lot of when we were looking at perfect competition. So we have the industry demand and supply here, demand downward sloping, supply upward sloping, as we'd expect. And then we look at the demand and supply for the individual firm, and we can see this funny shaped demand curve. They have MRP, which we're going to have a look at why it's shaped in that way. And we also see a perfectly elastic supply curve for labour, which is illustrating to us that this is a competitive market where the firm are wage takers in a way. They're taking the market rate for wages. They don't have control over setting that, and employees as well are taking that market rate, indicating to us that the employees constitute a very small proportion of the market. So one employee out of all the employees, say in the country or for a particular job, is a very small proportion, and we can see that the firm itself as well would be a small proportion of the employers in the market as well, because they have no control over this wage that is being set. So let's have a look at this section then. So these numbers here I've just copied and pasted from a very early presentation on costs, and we were looking at joining together total product and average product and marginal product with total cost, average cost, marginal cost, and showing that they show, well, demonstrating that it shows diminishing returns set in the short run because of that fixed factor of production. And we can see here that happening, marginal product increases and then starts to decrease. If we assume that our capital is in fixed quantity, adding more people in is fine at the beginning and they're gaining from teamwork and being able to work together, but after a while actually more people just means that it's a lot more crowded, and every additional person is adding less to total product than the person before them, which is what diminishing marginal returns actually means. So if we look at this from a slightly different angle, when we look at, well, how much demand for labour will the firm have, we'll want to work out firstly the total revenue from each unit of labour, how much they can make. So we've got each unit of labour here, this first unit of labour, is making 5 units of output. If we imagine that the price of the product, and they're in a perfectly competitive market, we're going to assume, just to keep the numbers simple, so it doesn't matter how much they sell, it's always going to be the same price. If we imagine the price is £5, what we'd get is this for total revenue. So all I've done there is total product, 5 times 5 equals 25, and here they're making, with 2 units of labour, they can make 12 units of output, times that by 5 and you get 60 all the way along. So we can see that total revenue actually is increasing because total product is increasing here. We haven't seen total product dip just yet. Okay, so marginal revenue product is just going to be the marginal revenue that you get from selling an additional unit. And remember that the price was going to be £5 no matter how much they sold, because they're in a perfectly competitive market. So therefore the marginal revenue will also be £5, and we're just going to times it by, instead of doing it by total product, we're going to do it by marginal product. So we're looking at how much revenue adding each additional worker brings to the firm. So if we have 1 worker, they can produce 5 units of output, so the marginal revenue product is 25. If we add another unit of labour, they're going to produce 7 more units of labour, so 7 times 5 is 35. Okay, I've just made up a labour cost, and I've imagined that it's going to be £10 per unit of labour. So we can see it's increasing, just £10 times each amount of labour here, and as I said before, we're in a perfectly competitive market, both in terms of the price that they can sell the product for, but also in terms of labour costs as well. So it's perfectly elastic, so it's just £10 for each additional unit of labour that they get. Okay, and then I'm going to work out the marginal cost here, which is just the additional cost of adding another unit of labour. And because it's the wage rate here is perfectly elastic, we're going to see that the marginal cost is always 10. Okay, so lots of numbers so far, quite complicated, but we get something quite interesting if we add another column. So if I add profits in, and profit, I'm just going to work this out by imagining that there are no fixed costs, but I'm just going to get the total revenue minus the variable costs of labour. So it's always going to be this one minus this one, and this is what we get for profit. Now, if we look down the column, I'll just get my pen, we can see that profit is going to be maximised here. And this fits with our profit maximising rule, actually, that profit is maximised when marginal cost is equal to our marginal revenue product. So on a diagram, it's going to look like this. So marginal revenue product there, and this is our marginal cost here, which in this case, because it's totally elastic, is actually equal to our average cost. Well, but the rule is that where marginal cost intersects this marginal product, that's the profit maximising output, and we can see that from those numbers on that previous table, and this is the point on the diagram. So in effect, this marginal revenue product becomes the demand for labour, and if average costs increase, that will mean that marginal costs also increase as well, and this would become the profit maximising output, and if average cost decrease, bringing as well, it would fall to there, and this would be the profit maximising output, an amount of labour that they'd want to employ. So that's the theory of marginal revenue product, and it's for looking at individual firms and how much labour they will employ. And we, just in case you were wondering why we get this like funny point here, this is showing our increasing marginal returns, and this is when diminishing marginal returns are setting in. So it's just like a marginal product curve in our product, except that we're timesing it by how much additional revenue we're getting from adding one more unit of labour to production. Okay, so here is the definition of marginal revenue product. Is the marginal revenue gains from employing one extra unit of a factor of production. In this case, we've been looking at labour. And it's calculated by getting the marginal revenue times the marginal product. And this basically equals the demand for labour. And the things that can affect the demand for labour, well, it's anything that can affect the marginal product and the marginal revenue. So marginal product is your productivity. So if you become more productive, this number is going to increase on this side. And then if you change the price of the product, the revenue, the marginal revenue that you're earning from each selling an additional unit, then it's going to change the marginal revenue product as well, because it's going to change this side of the equation. So changes in the output of the product that the labour is making can also have an impact on the demand. And remember, labour is a special type of market because it is actually derived demand, and derived demand, the definition is demand for a factor of production which is dependent on the demand for the final output that it produces. So if we have, just draw a makeshift diagram here, if we have an increase in productivity, what it's going to do is shift the marginal revenue product, which is the demand curve, to the right, an increase in productivity. If we have an increase in the price of the product as well that you're selling it for, it suddenly becomes more valuable for whatever reason. Tastes and fashions change, people's incomes increase, maybe the price of a substitute product increases, the price of a complement product decreases. You know, think back to all your AS stuff that you learned about, then that would also demand curve. If we find that the price of the output decreases, there's less demand for it. If we find that for some reason labour becomes less productive, demand would shift inwards. At the demand curve for labour. Another thing to look at, which links to AS course, is the elasticity of demand for labour, and this is very similar to the PED equation, but it's percentage change in quantity of labour demanded over percentage change in wage rate just being the price of labour. And these are the factors that can influence the PED of labour. So time, it follows the normal trend that we'd expect, that in the short run most products are inelastic because we can't really change our buying habits, or in this case, because we're looking at the labour market, we're looking at firms' production methods. So if the price of labour increases, so the wage rate goes up, in the short run there's probably not much they can do about it, especially with like employment laws. You can't just kind of get rid of employees and those types of things, whereas in the long run they might find it more cost effective to invest in automation or machinery that can be substituted for labour. The availability of substitutes will also have an effect. So as we see when we studied the course at AS with PED, if there's a lack of substitutes, this makes it very inelastic. So we're thinking about jobs here which would be very, very hard to perform by machines. You know, you really need that personal interaction. And then if there are lots of substitutes, so it can be very easily performed and automated. I'm just thinking about kind of checkouts in supermarkets now. That's a substitute for the person on the till. I know a lot of people actually still prefer the person on the till, but it is a substitute, and a lot of, I think every supermarket now these days have those automated checkouts as well. Whereas I think a lot of people would feel not very comfortable if they went to the GP surgery and there was like an automated doctor there. I mean, we do have automated services, like we have the kind of NHS online, and there's more like automated services through I don't know, is it 111 or something like that? But there's still some person required to be there, to be, you know, reading from the script and altering their answers based on the answers that you give, basically. The cost of labour relative to total cost. So when you learned about PED, this would have been price relative to income, but we're looking at the cost of labour. So yeah, the price of labour relative to the total cost of production. So if it's a very low cost, we're going to see that the price elasticity of demand for labour is going to be very inelastic, because even if it increases by a lot, because it's a low cost, it's not really having a huge impact on the total costs. Even if it decreases by a lot, again, it's not a huge kind of saving because it's a very small proportion of total costs. Whereas you're going to be very sensitive to wage changes if you're a very labour intensive business. So thinking about businesses such as education is very labour intensive. The biggest costs for schools and colleges would be their employees. And then finally, this is one that you wouldn't have had a look at in AS, the PED for the product itself. And remember, going back to labour being derived demand. So if the product is inelastic itself, we tend to find that the demand for labour is also inelastic. And if the product is elastic, we tend to find that the demand for labour is elastic as well.